The answer is to get some help.
It's one of those issues, isn't it? How many philatelists does it take to change a light bulb? No, it's impossible. You will never get them to cooperate long enough, is it? Philatelists don't change light bulbs. Unless it's downstairs in the members' room where the light bulbs keep going out, but that's a different question. We're going to start, even if we seem to have lost one or two people. I'm going to introduce Susan Taylor. Well, I'm not, because she's going to introduce herself on the second slide, which means you get less of me. And I'm going to introduce Lawrence Gretsch, who is, has been assisting Susan and will assist as required in due course. So Susan's a relatively new, a new philatelist, a relatively new member of the society. And I've warned her, if you keep volunteering to do things, you end up being the president, so be very careful. So with no more introduction, Susan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Well, Nicola asked me to... What? Microphone's not working. Oh, there you are. Thank you, Danny. I'll start again. Good afternoon. Nicola asked me to come along and present on how to write for a journal. She asked me to give you some insights to how to get started, and she asked me if I could also add any tips for encouraging other people to write. Well, I ought to start by saying I'm not an expert. In fact, I'm quite a novice. So this presentation is based on the first article that I ever wrote. It was entitled "The Western Covers, a Mystery Solved." I can give you a copy of the article if you're interested after this presentation. If you just give me your email address, I'll send you one. So, by way of introduction, I'm Susan Taylor. I only took up philately in 2018. Like many of you, I have a busy life. 6 grandchildren, aged under 8. I have a very over-demanding working Cocker Spaniel. And I have been very busy caring for 4 elderly parents over the past few years. In spite of all that, I became the secretary of the West Indies Philatelic Study Circle last year. That's the logo for the society. It was formed when British West Indian Study Circle and the British Caribbean Philatelic Study Group merged, and it has more than 400 members worldwide. Now, there are many misconceptions, I think, about writing for journals. One is that you must have an absolutely fabulous collection to write about. Another is that you need years and years of collecting experience, something a bit like PhD in philately. You may envisage spending many hours in dusty libraries, and it may seem like a very, very solitary, lonely venture. None of this is true. Remember, it's meant to be an enjoyable experience. So be happy and enjoy the journey. There is a joy in researching a topic that interests you and in making discoveries about it. So that's what the Love Heart is about, feeling the joy and feeling the love in sharing on Philatelic. Now, the sharp-eyed people in the audience will have noticed a Lady MacLeod stamp on this chart. The Lady MacLeod stamp is actually the logo of the Trinidad and Tobago Philatelic Society, and it symbolises how I became involved in this crazy philatelic business. John Bailey, my father, was a life member of the Trinidad and Tobago Philatelic Society. He collected the stamps of the West Indies, with a focus on Trinidad and Tobago, where he worked for many years and where I was born. Dad sadly had a major stroke and we lost him, at which point I took over his collection. Here is a typical example of what the pages in his extensive Caribbean collection look like. I knew I had a lot to learn. So I joined the Trinidad and Tobago Philatelic Society. I also joined what is now the West Indies Philatelic Society. They both had websites which were brimming with helpful information. There was an awesome exhibition about the Britannia stamps of Trinidad by someone I had never met by the name of Nigel Mohammed, and it caught my attention. The same exhibition is actually available on our website if you're interested to see it. Reading Nigel's exhibition taught me a lot, but there was something I noticed. 3 of the covers from the 1800s in the display were addressed to someone called Weston, living on the high street of Godalming, which is my local market town. I was curious about why someone would be writing to Godalming in the 1800s from Trinidad. So I contacted Nigel to ask if he knew. He didn't know, but he was able to tell me he had 6 of these covers, and he'd always wondered what the story was behind them. So Nigel encouraged me to do some research. This is Godalming. It hasn't changed much over the years. I used the Ancestry website to establish that Charles Weston had been running an ironmongery business in the high street, just on the right down here. Ah, said Nigel. He must have been buying agricultural equipment, the ironmongers. I said, I don't think so, because it would be much easier to buy from a port supplier than somebody from Godalming, middle of nowhere. I'd noticed that some of the letters were addressed to a Mrs. Weston, so I searched for her family on Ancestry. Charlotte Weston was the sister of Henry Presto, who was the superintendent of Trinidad's botanical gardens in the period 1864 to 1886. Henry had served an apprenticeship at Kew Gardens, and then he sailed to Trinidad, aged only 22. Quite a brave thing to do, I think. He became quite famous in the botanical world at a time when the British Empire was very interested in the cultivation of food crops. This role was key. Henry is the person who brought the mango to Queen Victoria's table. He accompanied the Princes George and Albert around Trinidad when they made the first ever visit by a royal to the island. That was in 1880. Nigel and I were rather pleased about this discovery, so we shared the news with our philatelic friends and asked whether anyone else owned any Presto or Weston covers. Before moving on, I want to draw your attention to something I had noticed. You see the little mauve circle there? I've put that on there to draw your attention to it. Henry often put his signature on the envelopes containing his letters, that little HP. There was a very positive response to our inquiries. We found Henry writing to his father, who was also a botanist. There was also some letters to another sister. Can any of you guess how many covers we found and catalogued? Let's see. Sometimes Henry's letters were registered, perhaps because he was sending envelopes containing money. So were there more than 15? Oh, yes. Goodness me. Goodness me. He was quite a prolific writer. So were there 23 covers? No. At the time, we found 25 covers. Another came to light later on. And close inspection showed that Henry had also posted wrappers, presumably around botanical journals, to the Botanic Gardens of Edinburgh, even to Calcutta. To learn more about Charles Weston, the ironmonger, I approached the archivist at the Godalming Museum. It turned out that the museum actually had a kitchen stove on display that had been made by Weston. Let's see. The archivist was able to help me to piece together Charles Weston's life story. I also contacted the archivist at Kew. She was fascinated to learn more about Henry Presto and took the research considerably further. She discovered that Henry had been awarded a medal at the 1878 Paris exhibition. There was something else she was able to help me with as well. See the letter up here? All the envelopes that I had found were just envelopes. I didn't have anything from inside the envelopes. But of course, Henry had been writing to Kew Gardens all those years, and all of his letters were on the Just Store archive. So she was able to provide me with some letters to have a look at. I was able to prove that that really was his signature on the outside of the envelopes. So that was very satisfying. It's worth remembering that all of this research work took place during COVID lockdowns. But it didn't stop us. There was much to be discovered on the internet, and members of the Trinidad and Tobago Philatelic Society came up with some beautiful old postcards of the botanical gardens. By this time, Peter Ford, the West Indian Society's publisher, heard of our discoveries, made contact, encouraged us to write an article. Now, we lost Peter recently, so I really want to log the fact that I'm most indebted to Peter for the encouragement he gave myself and many other people for many years to write. I still felt very much a novice, and I knew that philatelic readers would want more than a charming story. So Nigel Mohammed kindly offered to research and write about Presto's ship covers, many of which are apparently extremely rare. The covers are some of Trinidad's most collectible and desirable covers. 5 of them are considered extremely rare, and you can read more about them in the journal. But for example, they include an earliest registered male with a 4p rate. The other image on this page is an 1870s letter transported by a German steamer. Steamer there. Many of Presto's letters had too late markings and carried late fees, as shown here, these 6 penny stamps. Now, once you publish an article, if you cultivate it and share it well, it will continue to grow. One of Trinidad and Tobago's Society's members sent me this recently. It would seem that the pui tree that the princes planted with Henry Presto's assistance in 1880 is still alive. So it's a nice little link back to the past there. So what about the article? Well, the article was very well received, and there were some extremely encouraging remarks that a few kind people took the trouble to forward to us. There was, however, one disadvantage in having published this article. The price of Presto covers just went through the roof. It seems only right to give Nigel a say at this moment. He lives in America, so he could not be with us here today. So I'm just going to click on this and hopefully be able to hear what he has to say.
Hi, my name is Nigel Muhammad. I live here in the Chicago area in the U.S., and I am a collector of Trinidad's postal history and everything Trinidad Philatelic related. The reason I wanted to send you guys this video is over the years, I've made some great friends through different organizations, and one of my greatest friendships thus far has been with Susan Taylor. Susan Taylor is an exceptionally enthusiastic and great contributor to the hobby of stamp collecting and postal history. And although we live worlds apart, meaning across the pond, so to speak, that did not discourage us working together. Susan had found an article that I had published in the British West Indian Study Circle at the time, and that had sparked her interest that led into her contacting me, and a great beginning of a friendship began about 3 or 4 years ago. We ended up working on an article, the Presto Letters, that was published in the journal, and a year or two later, we ended up collaborating and helping Susan with the, I would call it, famous Lady MacLeod book that was published about a year ago. So my message to you guys and everyone who is interested in the hobby is that don't let there be barriers from a distance standpoint. We have the power of the internet and power of communicating remotely, and all it takes is the desire and the will and the ability to stay focused, and you can accomplish doing great things as far as research and collaborating on stories and research. So hopefully this helps and inspires those of us who are considering or on the fence. There are no barriers to this, so get in touch with people who have your similar interests and passion, and you can make great things happen. Take care, and all the best from the U.S.
That was nice of him, wasn't it? So, what do you really need to write an interesting philatelic article, or indeed a book? Be curious. Don't be afraid to reach out to others. A captivating story helps. So I keep what I call a dump bin. You described it in a slightly more sophisticated way earlier on this morning, but I call it my dump bin, where I tuck away items that I come across and think, oh, that might be interesting to look into at some time later on. Consider your audience. Give them a philatelic hit, but please don't kill them with perforations or print run numbers, unless you're particularly writing to people who get a buzz out of that. Join some philatelic societies. I now belong to all of these societies. I'm chair of my local Guildford Society, which celebrates its 80th anniversary this year, and which John Marriott was a member of as well. I'm a life member of the Trinidad and Tobago Society, secretary of the West Indies Philatelic Society group, study group, a member of Epsom and Newell, and a year ago I joined the Royal. Members of all these societies have given me great encouragement, shared knowledge, and some of them have actually involved themselves in writing with me. And I should say how helpful Nicola and her team here in the library always are when I'm doing research. Be willing to follow things up. Use the internet, museums, archives, ancestry. Think creatively about where to research and ask people for help. Make friends with your editor at a fairly early stage. The West Indies Society, it's a bit of a mouthful saying all those words, has an editor which, believe it or not, is a gentleman called Darrell Fuller who lives in Tasmania. So we send him articles from all over the world. He sends it back to us, beautiful form. Get to know your editor. You can help him and he can help you. One of the first things I look for when I'm researching is a good philatelic book, just as you said this morning. Marriott's Trinidad was an excellent resource for the Western article. Search Society archives. For example, the West Indian Philatelic Study Group has a wonderful online archive of journals that have been invaluable in researching the book I'm writing currently. I'll tell you more about that later on. I should mention, as was mentioned earlier today by Chris, that the archives need us. They're only as good as we make them. So please do share the records from your societies with the RPSL or any other societies that are holding archives. Ancestry is very handy for discovering who the people named on covers and in documents are. Here's one you might not have thought of. Contact your stamp dealers. Don't just buy things from them. Some of the stamp dealers in the West Indian world are really knowledgeable guys. People like Michael Hamilton and Steve Druitt from the West Indies group always have useful information to give you if you ask them, and they're always very helpful. Look at online newspaper archives. The old Port of Spain gazettes for Trinidad were invaluable when I was researching the Lady MacLeod book, and they're held online by, I think it's the Florida University, if I remember correctly, but you can find their archives online, which is brilliant. And at the moment I'm writing a book on Anguilla, and the Anguilla AXA Library keeps all the old beacons which relate to that whole period of the revolution. Use your catalogues. Read the small print. It can be revealing. Organisations like Stanley Gibbons are always willing to help with inquiries as well. I'll mention Ed Barrow by name because he deals with a lot of the West Indian stuff, and he's always extremely helpful to me down at Stanley Gibbons. Contact archivists wherever they are when there's a relevance to your work. So look for them because they will be more than willing to help you. And of course, use reference libraries. Well, I must slide behind myself, but there we go. Here we go. Here are some technical points that are worth bearing in mind. Prepare the text in Microsoft Word. Simulate the layout. Think about paper size and fonts. And mark your illustrations clearly and send them in at least 300 ppi. Ask your editor about how to handle references. This can be the cause of so much angst, so it's best to start the right way. I always mark my reference numbers in red in the text. It's just a thing I do, but it makes it easier for me to find them if I'm editing. And the colour can be very easily changed at the end. Think about dates. So don't use the British 7th of the 2nd, 71, for example. That has the potential to confuse a lot of American readers. doesn't work. So particularly it doesn't work if you're actually going to be talking about something from the 1820s, say. So use the 7th of February 1971. Next slide is probably the most important in this presentation. So what do we all need to do to encourage other people to write? I have a question for each of you. When did you last send a thank you to someone who has written an article? Imagine a novice who slaves away to produce their first article and there is no response. Or worse, one grumpy old so-and-so sends a message saying, "You've got the watermark wrong on page 7. A thank you costs nothing and will encourage that individual to write again. And as they do so, their research and capability will grow. You really need to nurture new contributors. Share your own knowledge, your scans, and most important of all, your enthusiasm. Keep an eye out for people with interesting collections or a curiosity about a particular topic and encourage them to write it up. So from that first article published only in 2020, I've gone on to write a few articles. And as Nigel mentioned, I co-wrote this study paper, The Untold Story of the Lady Macleod. The last few copies, there are a few of them around here today, I think, if you're interested. This year, with the help and encouragement from all of those philatelic societies I named, Anguilla's Quest for Identity, the Philatelic Story, is due to be published in September. So I'd encourage you all to start writing. You'll make new friends and find the process of sharing your research efforts great fun, highly rewarding. So now I'm going to invite Lawrence Gretsch and Steve Jarvis to join me to answer questions. Lawrence has been writing some very interesting articles for the journal, and Steve Jarvis is our chair and webmaster at the West Indian Society. If you collect West Indian stamps, think about joining us. It only costs £8 a year for online membership. And of course, I have to put that advert in as the secretary. So if you guys could join me, we'll take some questions. Thank you. This is Lawrence, and this is Steve.
Steve, this one for you. 5, ready for you to use. Thank you.
Do you want us to talk through the articles that we've written?
I don't know, whatever you'd like. Yes, yeah.
Do I have to press?
But Lawrence, remember to speak into it.
Yes. So here we go. So Susan's very energetic and enthusiastic. She's also very persuasive, which is why I find myself here. I joined the British West Indies Study Circle probably 3 years ago, and the Royal a couple of years ago. My time at the Royal has been spent mostly in the basement. This is the first time I've ventured, I think, past the ground floor, so bear with me. In terms of article writing, so the first article I wrote, a short one, for the bulletin in March of last year. It was in response to a request for articles from the editor who said, "I don't have enough articles, send us some." And so I was thinking what to write. I wanted to do something that might provoke some interaction between members, because I didn't think there was enough interaction. We don't have chat rooms or message boards or anything like that. So I wrote a short piece. I'd noticed that on the Barbados victory issue, I think the 1D it is, missing C of CA in the watermark. I found 3 of them in the space of about 6 weeks. And Stanley Gibbons have them at, several £100s, and I thought, why is this? Is this just because, people don't notice the watermark and there's actually lots of them kicking around? So I kind of wrote an article just to ask the question, and I was delighted that it prompted a response from one of the other members in the subsequent issue, and also Hugh Jeffreys from Stanley Gibbons contacted me about the article as well. So that was very gratifying. In the same issue, there was a somewhat longer article co-authored with Jonathan Guy, who runs Barbados Stamps website, which is very good. And that was all about advocating collecting the stamps and varieties of the era of independent Barbados, which is a particular passion of mine, and wanted to encourage people to look at newer issues as well. I think after that, the next issue had a short appeal for examples of the Barbados Kingston Relief Fund overprint. By the way, I'm still appealing for examples of the Kingston Relief Fund overprint if anybody has any. Then again with Jonathan, we collaborated on an article on the Barbados-Belgium Relief Fund labels of the First World War, increasing the generally accepted. There are 4 covers with these labels on to, I think, 6, including a postcard that we managed to track down. And then finally, probably the one actually I'm most proud of, an article on the Barbados stamp wallet from 1977, which is unlisted in any catalogue. You occasionally see them come up at auctions for a £5 or £10, whatever. And Jonathan and I researched that, and we were very fortunate that the lovely people at the Barbados GPO dug out some archives, some correspondence from that period of time. And yeah, we were able to really bring to life what had happened, why they came about, who produced the wallets, who printed them, everything. And so, I felt with that one we were really adding to the body of knowledge, and so that was very gratifying. Wrote another one which I thought was going to come out in March of this year, but it seems there isn't such a shortage of articles anymore, and I'm now expecting it will come out in September. I've been promised it will be the cover story in the journal. So there you go. That was my best efforts to date.
My particular focus at the moment is trying to encourage more articles on modern philately. Is that coming through? Okay, I'll hold it up a bit higher. Yeah, I do a lot of research on Jamaican philately, and there's a lot of information around for what I'd call the sort of classic era, or up to, say, George VI. But trying to do research on more modern stuff, Queen Elizabeth and onwards, is very difficult, because people have not been writing articles at the time of events occurring. I wanted to find out the postal rates that applied from 1950s up into the 2000s. And it's a minefield just trying to find that information from anywhere. If you look back earlier, people published in the journal saying, oh, there's a postal rate change on this island coming up or just taken place. Sort of Tom Foster was good at that in stamp collecting. But people have stopped doing that. And so it's very difficult to find out this information. And if our hobby is going to survive, we need people documenting here and now, so that people in 30, 50 years can still have an interest and find out things. So one of the things that I'm trying to encourage is more articles on modern stamps and postal history, and we've had a couple of very recent articles on modern stamps. Susan's also leading the way in terms of articles, particularly on Trinidad, so the modern issues and thematic and open philately. Excuse me. So I think that is actually starting to engender a broader interest, and younger people, I think, are relating a bit more to it than the old stuffy stuff that we've done traditionally in terms of perforations and watermarks and printings. It's the story behind the stamps that I think is more important going forward.
Yeah, one comment from my side. David suggested to us before writing an article, go for excellence. And he had very good arguments, in my opinion. I was asking myself, however could we encourage new writers to go to that level of excellence which was suggested? And I'm very pleased, and I would like to take your advice. Thank you for your talk. If I got it right, in my words, it's start easy, but then also adopt the principles David had suggested, as you also told us, see the archives, see the sources, but in my opinion, you made a great bridge on how to start and then how to evolve. So thank you for this talk.
Thank you.
Can I just comment on go for the excellence? You don't want to publish rubbish, but but it's important to get something out there into the world and let people comment on it and provide additional information. Whatever you write is probably not going to be the last word on the subject, and it's better to get something out that's decent at an early stage and invite other people to contribute to that so that you can do better next time and perhaps end up in publishing a book or something like that with what you might consider to be the definitive statement. So I've got a colleague who is always going for perfection and says, well, I'm not quite sure of the answer here, so I don't want to publish yet. I say, get it out there. Somebody might have the information and be able to plug that gap in your knowledge.
Rob, did you have a question?
Yep.
Hi.
Thank you, Susan. My thoughts is about interaction. Yes, I would agree that you don't want to publish rubbish, but there's nothing wrong, in my view, with publishing something that is an inquiry of everybody else. To me, the process of print journals is not particularly good at being interactive. These days, there seem to be much better ways of doing it online.
I think you're raising a very good point, Bob. The book that I'm writing with some other people on Anguilla at the moment, we've actually tried to bring the internet into that, and we're actually going to establish a census online as well as in the book, so that people can actually add further information on the stamps and the postmarks and so on as we go forward. And I think we need to do more of that. Of course, the big issue with doing that is that you need people to run the website and to help you with all of the technology. We're very lucky here because we've got Steve, but it is quite important to have that follow through.
Thank you for an excellent presentation, all three of you. Your passion shows through. I like the word passion. It's a driving force. So where are the archives for the area you're concerned? Where would you go to find the information? Could you compile a list? Because I would say if you compiled a list of where all the archives were, you're opening the door to so many other people to do it. So what would you expect to find at the Royal? What would you expect to find at the British Library? Where would you expect to find these things?
Is this on? I'll use the Anguilla book as an up-to-date example, although in fact there's a lovely example involving Danny on the book I did on the Lady MacLeod. I did a bit of research, but actually he did reply to my email. And he was very helpful, and I think we both benefited from that because I actually managed to make some discoveries about the Lady MacLeod that they have on show at the Smithsonian. But coming back to your question, I think it depends on what you're doing, but the Anguilla book, we've actually looked in the Blue Books, done work at the library, been in touch with, forgive me if I've got the name right, is it Paul Schofield? Paul at the British Library. Skinner, Paul Skinner. He's been very helpful. So we've done work there. Been in the library here quite a bit, looking at all sorts of things and getting a lot of help from Nicola and her team. Internet. other things as well. For example, if you talk to the dealers, I mean, Anguilla's a fairly modern country, but the big issue, the big challenge with Anguilla is getting anything pre-1930. They're like hen's teeth, yeah? But I think, actually, Danny, I need some help from your guys, actually, because there's a general store that features on a lot of the covers. I'm trying to remember the name of it now. Anyway, I believe that the archive of that general store is held at the Smithsonian, so you might be getting an email from me. So. But you've just got to go to the route, wherever it is, and you can find all sorts of archives in all sorts of ways. When I wrote the Lady Macleod book, some of you may have heard about the captain, David Bryce, who sailed across the Atlantic in this small steamer in the hurricane season. Incredible. It was an interesting end to his story because he actually died in Trinidad rather unexpectedly. What I found was that I was trying to find out what happened to his family, and I discovered that his children were educated at a school up in Scotland that actually was founded by a guy who used to sail ships and who was used to sail slave ships, actually, and who, because he felt bad about that penance, funded this school. So I contacted the archivist there, and she gave me information as well. So you can find information, source information in all sorts of places as long as you're creative about it. People are always willing to help. Does that answer?
Sorry, can I just add? I mean, the internet is really a great resource, but you have to be patient and tenacious with it. You don't always find what you're looking for straight away. You have to really dig around, you know, Belgium Relief Fund labels or Belgian Relief Fund labels. You won't find. It's, you know, and it's not as dusty.
I'd like to support Steve in what you said about QE2 and research. The bibliography is not very much around, is there, when you're doing research on it? But it's 70 years of philatelic history that there's very little written about, and we really do need to make sure that the specialist societies especially do a lot of work in this area. We're very lucky with the Falkland Islands that the National Archives down in Stanley have the correspondence between the Crown agents and the government about all the QE2 issues, so that helps a bit. But it's a very important part of philately that we need to focus on, and people, as you say, get a bit stuffy about it sometimes, but there's 70 years worth of history that we need to document.
It's also worth being tenacious as well. And your stamp societies can help you in that front. Those of you who know the Anguilla story will know that the troops invaded the island in 1869. And there are some covers from the field office at that time. And I began to notice that some of the covers that we had as we were searching around in the philatelic world were all addressed to a gentleman called Mr. Hare. So I looked carefully at his address. He obviously would have been dead by now. What could I do to find out about him? So I contacted the Philatelic Society in the area where he used to live, because I knew that even though they might not know anything about him, because he'd probably been dead a long time, they might have records. And they did. They found records. And I found this amazing story about Mr. Hare, who used to write to the field offices and ask them if they would send him post. Apparently, at some point, probably in the Falklands War, somebody wrote to him and said, look, more important things to do than sending you post. Bit of a shame, but you know, things like that can be really worth looking into. So do be tenacious and do follow things up.
Can I just add, by the way, it doesn't have to be a long article. Editors really like short articles as well that they can use to fill in the little spaces that they've got. So you know, you can start small.
You need to carry on for 10 more minutes. Can you do that?
Oh, sorry. I was worried I wasn't going to get finished in time, so I was kind of prompting myself along a bit.
we're going to, which is the other alternative. We might just prolong the coffee. I just looked up Anguilla in the Global Philatelic Library. There's 127 references, 127 pages of 15 references a page. 1,895 references to Anguilla. And that's everything from postal rates in 1711 through to QE2 stamps, articles in endless journals, in endless libraries. So there is, if you don't use the Global Philatelic Library, it really, really is worth looking to. It's a bit on the clumsy side, but how many libraries have we got now? No. Yeah. 15. So it's basically, it's the complete catalogue of 15 libraries. And it really is worth going to. You have to do a lot of sieving, but it's very, very, very worthwhile. It's I think it's the single most effective source of references that you're likely to find. Some good points about modern rate tables. I mean, we collect the Royal collects modern rate tables, and they're incredibly hard to keep up to date. There is probably not 70 years of mysteries, but there is a developing mystery in modern stamps, and it's really interesting that the West Indies Study Circle and others are looking at exactly that. Thank you so much, Susan. That was really interesting. You just need to know that Nigel Mohammed is not a member.
Yes, I know.
but he is on the database. So there's a task should you choose to accept it. Another interesting thing is when you probably know Beata was never a collector until sometime after she married me. And she kind of caught this. But I used to collect Danish stamps, modern Danish stamps, and some of you will be aware of the wavy line stamps, the Danish wavy line stamps. And these have got a left-facing lion and a right-facing lion in the top right-hand corners. And there are, in 1933, there was an engraved version of this stamp. And you tell the printings from the number of engraved squares in the left-hand lion's forepaw. And I remember saying to Beata, can you count the squares in the left-hand lion's forepaw for me? I think there are 2. And she looked at me and she said, no. That's just not. If that's philately, I'm not interested. And of course, Beata's, like you, are interested in who did it, how can we find out about them in ancestry, what's on the cover, who's the cover to, who's the cover from, what were the contents of the letter. And it's really interesting when you go to philatelic societies and you see presentations. A number of those that attract the most interest are actually the story behind the cover, if you like. And it's part of philately which we have to embrace and welcome and accept, because today, with the presentations we've had so far, have demonstrated that philately is the broadest of broad churches. And I'm most grateful for your contribution, for your story, which is fascinating. A friend of mine lost a Lady MacLeod cover in the post once. It's never been recovered. So I hope you've given encouragement to others to write. Thanks very much, Steve. Thanks so much, Lawrence, for your contribution. And we'll take some early coffee, and we'll be back here at 3:30. Thank you very much indeed.